brave knight is destined to die on the battlefield. He used to believe that someone like him, whose talents awakened, blossomed, and took root on the battlefield, could start a new life. In that new life, he imagined he could finally create a family, which is something he desperately yearned for. But sadly for him, everything turned out to be just a pipe dream. The knight on his knees before us is none other than the famed Argric from the Drenic Empire, the protagonist of our story. His final opponent is also a great knight, who goes by the name Duke Thermion, one of the 6 Hexaclass knights of the Altheon Empire. Even Argric knows the weight of the challenge before him, especially since he has already felt the crushing pressure of the Black Wave after just a single day on this battlefield. Duke Thermion finds it fascinating that Argric still stands against him, despite knowing he is against one of the 6 Hexaclass knights. He even laments that it would be such a shame to end a blooming talent like our hero here. But Argric is far from surrendering. He defiantly swings his sword as he stands back on his feet and makes it abundantly clear that he was born on the battlefield, and this is where he'll die too. The two contestants begin to walk toward each other, and the sheer aura they exude sends the area into chaos. Duke Thermion can't help but point out that, even though Argric is being so brave, there is still a hint of regret lingering in his eyes. The Duke continues to talk about how Argric could have been a formidable rival for him in the future. But then, he charges his sword with energy, rushing straight at our hero while expressing hope that, once he gets a new life, he will be able to let go of his regrets. With that, the Duke swings his sword, but before Argric kicks the bucket, he narrates that the war between the Drenic Empire and the Altheon Empire has lasted for many years. His mother was a victim of this war, and he was just a newborn when she died due to the chaos around them, leaving him alone in this tumultuous world as an orphan. While other children play with toys and read books, he struggled to contribute to the war and fight for his kingdom. After turning 14, he had to pick up the sword himself and was sent to his first battlefield. He fought bravely, and it was in this moment that his talents awakened. The mana core in his heart amplified his movements and senses to a level he could never have imagined before. He began rising through the ranks among the knights, and surprised everyone by harnessing 3 mana cores and becoming a quad core with 4 cores. His dream of joining the 5 Hexaclass Knights of the Empire was within reach. He finally had the opportunity he had been desperately wanting. He believed that this last war might finally bring him peace from his weary life. So, he fought his final battle valiantly, knowing he was on the brink of achieving everything he had ever dreamed of. That was until Duke Thermion arrived on the scene, and his mere presence sent everyone scattering. Back in the present, that first swing from Duke shatters Argric's sword into bits and pieces, and his dream instantly shattered before his eyes, and the next blow from the Duke pierced his heart, and he reflects how all he wanted to create a family, but he lost. The stab wound sends him flying across the battlefield, crashing hard onto the ground. The impact shatters the earth beneath him as he slides, leaving him bloodied and battered. As he begins to lose consciousness, everything fades to pitch black. But the veil of darkness lifts the moment he opens his eyes. The first thing he sees is husband and wife trying to play with him, or rather, they are trying to play with their child. Argric quickly starts losing his shit once he hears them calling him their child. His father quickly hoists him up, and with a broad smile over his face, he addresses him as Dane. He tells him he must become a fantastic spearman and follow in his father's footsteps. His mother, who goes by the name Lily Sogris, quickly yanks him out of his husband's arms, insisting he will become a fantastic assassin. The husband, Arkan Sogris, and his wife both argue about which career their son should pursue, while Argric feels timid and confused by the bickering. They are apparently traveling in the carriage toward their home, and they argue throughout their journey about the same thing. Lily believes that sneaking through the darkness to assassinate targets and slipping away untouched is a much cooler path, while the father insists that the spear is the most beautiful and complete martial art. Well, that's how it goes for our hero. Just when he had thought he was done for in that battlefield, he miraculously ends up reincarnating. The twist in his story is that he finds himself in the Altheon Empire, his enemy, as the youngest son of a certain count. Once the carriage finally hits the brakes as they enter the mansion grounds, his parents come to a middle ground and decide they'll teach him both skills. But Lily still has not given up, and annoyingly states that their son will become an assassin, while Arkan just laughs it off, insisting that Dane will become a spearman. The carriage driver shakes his head, signaling their arrival, and both parents are a bit confused that they're already there. I guess they must have lost track of time while arguing with each other. The husband quickly hops out of the carriage and decides to help his wife down as well. He extends his hand to her, and she feels a bit embarrassed, and asks him what if the members of the castle see them. He chuckles and replies that he's just trying to hold his wife's hand, so why would that even matter? With that, he escorts his beautiful wife out of the carriage, while Argric can't help but feel awkward watching his dad act like such a simp. But eventually, His awkwardness fades as his eyes widen after taking in the grandeur of the castle. Once they finally make their way inside, Lily can't help but notice how happy Dane seems to be back home. I mean, why wouldn't he be happy? With a house like this and parents that wealthy, it might be easier for his talents to spread their wings than he ever thought possible. 2 months pass since that day, and we find Lily chatting with her son, who has started to babble. She's thrilled that he's finally making sounds, while our boy is equally fascinated to experience this babbling firsthand, something he never got to hear before. You see, opportunities to meet young children were scarce during his time wandering on the battlefield. The few kids he did see were often wrapped in bandages, crying because they had nowhere to go. Many mourning for parents who slowly succumbed to destruction and faded away. So, compared to that, his new home is a fortunate and wealthy place, and he's relieved he won't be starving here at all. Suddenly, the father bursts through the room's door, enthusiastically stepping in with a spear in hand. He proudly announces that this is called a spear. It seems that our boy is not at all a fan of his father's enthusiastic side. He is having a hard time believing that this man is his father, who is the strongest Hexa-class spearman in the Empire, known as Sogris. Even though he does not look like a war hero at all, but he was in fact a war hero known as the Blue Whirlwind. His wife gets annoyed and starts pushing him away from the kid, asking how he could enter the child's room with something so sharp. The man begins to lose his cool under her intense gaze and timidly says he just wanted to show it to Dane. But she's giving off a deadly vibe, reminding him that didn't she tell him they wouldn't be teaching their son anything until he reached an appropriate age? Well, it's not surprising that this grown man is trembling in fear under her sharp gaze, because his wife is the best assassin in the Empire. Meanwhile, she argues that if he keeps this up, she's going to teach their son the basics of stealth while he's still young too. He tries to argue that everyone is doing early education these days. Even one of the famed magic houses, known as House Teleport, puts a staff next to a child the moment they're born. But his wife gets annoyed again and asks if the spear looks like a staff to him now. Meanwhile, our boy reflects and tells us that the reason his parents are putting so much importance on his future is that his 2 older sisters chose careers that have nothing to do with spear fighting or assassination. Noon arrives, and we see his 2 sisters playing around with their younger brother, making his cheeks look all sore. One of his sisters, Arabella, laughs and says he looks even cuter now with stuffed cheeks. Meanwhile, our boy narrates about Arabella and reveals that because of her talent in magic, she has been on the path of a mage since she was little. By 12, she was already a 3-chain class mage, and since the highest class for a mage is 9 chains, it means she's a genius who has already surpassed the entry level. Arabella then asks his little brother if he wants to learn magic with her later, saying she has gotten bored learning by herself every day and would be happy to teach her little brother a thing or two. While Arabella is full of energy, her sister Claire is totally the opposite. Nervous and composed, she timidly says she can teach him summoning, since it's a handy trick to have in your back pocket. Just like Arabella, Claire is a talented girl who excels in summoning. She successfully made her first summon at the age of 7 and can now handle 2 summons at once. Arabella then playfully tells Claire to touch him, insisting he's just too soft. But Claire seems wary about touching him, unsure if she should. Meanwhile, Dane is acting all cute and chummy, and reflects how he initially thought Claire didn't like him. Now he realizes it's more like she's feeling jealous because he's the youngest in the family now, stealing all the attention. Eventually, Claire extends her hand and gently touches his nose. She gets ecstatic and exclaims about how soft he really is. She touches him again and promises to teach him everything once he grows up. Dane can't help but find it a bit overwhelming how everyone wants to drill their own specialties into him. His father is a Hexa-class spearman. His mother is a talented assassin, though a retired one. And his eldest sister is a genius mage. Then there's Claire, who's also a genius summoner. The house of Count Sogres is the perfect noble family, the ideal family he always imagined. He wonders if there's even a point to seeking revenge in this new life. Sure, his death was regrettable, but that place was a battlefield. It's almost funny to think about taking revenge on someone who beat him fair and square. The entire family gathers in the hall, arguing among themselves and trying to convince each other how their specialties would suit Dane better. Watching this heartwarming chatter among his family brings a smile to Dane's face because this is the kind of family he's always hoped for, and he's glad he was born here. But when things start to escalate and everyone begins to fume at each other, he starts to doubt if this is what a harmonious family is really like. We then learn about the special ceremony that exists in the House of Sogres, which is known as the choosing ceremony. You see, when a child is born into the family and turns 1, various objects are placed on a table in front of them, and people try to predict the child's future based on what object they grab. Since a year has flown by, today is young Master Dane's turn, as he has already turned 1 year old, and he will choose his class. The gathered guests chat among themselves, noting how the young ladies became a mage and a summoner, and they wonder what young Master Dane will choose. They decide to make their way to the ceremony hall to find out what Dane will choose. Once the guests gather in the grand hall, we see that Dane is sitting near 4 different items, each belonging to a different class. As the crowd gathers around the table where Dane is sitting, his mother tells him he just needs to choose the one he likes. However, Dane doesn't look quite sure about what he should pick. He glances at his father, who is eagerly waiting for him to pick the spear. His father is smirking while thinking that little Dane will probably be drawn to the dragontail spear. Apparently this spearhead is made from rare ducran, and when mana is imbued in it, it becomes as sharp and heavy as the mana the user puts into it. On the other hand, his mother feels happy and proud while thinking that Dane is too handsome to become an assassin. Still, she's sure he'll end up choosing the dagger. This dagger isn't just any simple knife. It's called Nighthorn, and is made from ethereal ore, which can hold all the world's elements and store multiple different poisons. Just like their parents, Dane's sister is confident that he will become a great mage and that he'll choose the pouch to keep the mage's legacy alive. This bag is also a special subspace pouch, an object that can only be used by mages or those with magical talent. On the other hand, Claire, with her usual timid expression, wonders if Dane can summon. The item before him is actually a summon sign, which is a summoner's tool. Summoners use this sign to receive a code based on their talent, allowing them to call upon their summons. But Dane is feeling quite confused and unsure about what to do, because he can literally hear the thoughts of his family members. Eventually, he lets out a sigh and makes his final decision. He starts crawling toward the items, and the crowd's excitement rises with anticipation. As he picks up speed, his parents and siblings are absolutely overjoyed to see him moving, cheering him on in their own ways. His father tells him to choose something sturdy, while his mother encourages him to pick something short and sharp. As he gets closer, a yellow light begins to shimmer from all the items laid out on the table. Dane has no idea what's happening, and his family is just as clueless. On the other hand, the crowd smiles and gets excited as well as shocked when they realize that all of the 4 items just reacted, which is something unheard of. They can't help but admit that the young master seems like a generational genius after all. Meanwhile, Dane is just as bewildered by the situation. He recalls how he was a talented soldier in the battlefield, but in this life, he feels like he's on a whole other level. Little Arabella curiously asks her father what they should do since this has never happened before. But both their father and mother look just as lost, realizing that this means they need to teach him all 4 elements. Of course, this shocks the other 2 ladies, while Dane just smiles heartily in response. Time passes, and we find ourselves in the training hall, where we can hear weapons clashing. It turns out to be none other than Dane and his father. By the looks of it, our boy has grown a lot since we last saw him, which was only about 30 seconds ago, if I'm not mistaken. Arkan flashes a broad grin at his son for his good results, as Dane has perfectly polished the technique he taught him before. The boy thanks his father, and we learn that Dane has now turned 7. As they share a fun laugh, a man suddenly appears on the scene. Dane looks at him curiously, and we see that the man is presenting a spear. Seems like Arkan was clearly expecting the spear to arrive, and he promptly grabs it and offers it to Dane, telling him that this is his birthday gift. He explains that he was originally going to give it to him during the birthday banquet, but he wanted to give it to him before his mom's gift. Arkan further explains that he has been preparing this spear for 2 years, and that it was specially commissioned from a renowned craftsman in the capital. He then wishes him an early happy 7th birthday, and our boy eagerly drops his old stick and grabs the spear from his father, saying he'll use it because it's just so cool. He's really digging how the black handle and silver spearhead look together, and on top of that, it's surprisingly light. His father asks if he likes it, and he responds that he loves it. In fact, he's so excited that he starts fidgeting with it already. His father then asks if he knows the difference between a sword and a spear. Dane explains that with the spear's length, you can effectively keep opponents at a distance, and because of its small point of contact, it has a high attack efficiency. His father agrees, saying that's true, but warns him that as he gets stronger, it'll actually be harder to use than a sword. He points out the fundamental issue with spears. To attack, you need a minimum distance between you and your opponent, but he tells him not to worry about it too much since every weapon has its pros and cons. He explains that even swords, which are often called the perfect weapon, can be weak in certain situations. The son perks up at this, saying he'll keep that in mind. The father then starts spinning the spear in his hand and invites his son for a spar to show him something. Dane is absolutely boggled out of his mind to see the power radiating from his father. This is the first time he's witnessed the insane power flow of a hexaclass spearman, and the magic energy his dad is emitting is just overwhelming. After charging up, the father quickly thrusts the spear forward, and the space around the tip starts to distort. He explains that the reason for the distortion is that he released his magic power while thrusting the spear. This technique utilizes the trait of the core that focuses magic power in one place. The son mentions that he's heard about this from his sister, and explains that humans can exceed their physical abilities as the number of cores increases, meaning their limits can be pushed. He reflects on how, in his past, he had a quad core, and all this knowledge he has right now is from his previous life. Meanwhile, his father starts smiling broadly, thinking about how well his son has been studying, and reminds him that he now has 6 mana cores. Of course, our boy pretends to be shocked, but inside, he thinks about how, if he hadn't died, he could have achieved 6 cores as well. Then, his father encourages him to give his new spear a try. Dane looks a bit hesitant, but his father tells him to just relax his mind, forget his worries, and thrust the spear. The son agrees, and as he holds the spear, he reflects on how, in his past life, he had no interest in spears. After realizing his talent for swordsmanship, he had only used spears as a secondary option, but now, it's finally time for him to give it a try. After striking his stance, he closes his eyes, while his father reflects on how he's got a good form. He can't help but smile ear to ear because it took him 7 years to master this technique. But since his son is still so young, he wonders if he can even pull it off at all. But as soon as Dane thrusts the spear, reality shatters, completely subverting his father's expectations. He genuinely wasn't expecting this miracle to happen. He freaks out and begins to shout, asking his son how he knows so much. Once Dane finishes performing the technique, the man walks over to his son, laughing and saying he did an impressive job. Dane explains that at the moment he thrust the spear, he gathered magic power into one place and imbued it into the spearhead. When the magic power reached the spearhead, he cut off its flow. The father goes bonkers when he hears this and asks if he has formed a mana core. Dane replies yes, revealing that while he was reading a book about creating mana cores, he decided to try it out, and luckily, he was able to succeed. But of course he is lying, because the truth is that he formed it while practicing mana breathing. The father kneels down to get eye level with his son, unable to help but feel proud. He's sure that one day his son will become an extraordinary warrior. Dane just flashes a smile, while thinking in his head about all the surprises he has in store for the future that are sure to blow his father's mind. Meanwhile, the father wonders if his son will really become a mage, a spearman, an assassin, and a summoner all at once. As night falls, it's finally the start of Dane's 7th birthday. Guests are gathering in the castle, and the hall is filled with music and the clamor of laughter. Everyone is having the time of their lives. Duke Bout, the same guy who killed our boy in his past life, is also attending the party. Once he spots Arkan, he calls him over to catch up. Arkan addresses him with the title Duke, but Bout tells him to drop the formality and just talk like they usually do. As we know, Bout is from the greatest house of the Altheon Empire and the head of the Thermion Duchy. Arkan quickly dashes toward his friend and whispers that many people are watching them, so he needs to keep up the act of formality. The Duke tells him to do as he pleases and asks where his son is. That's when Arkan calls out to Dane and tells him to say hello to Duke Thermion. As soon as he hears the mention of Duke Thermion, Dane's mind flashes back into the past where he had the last encounter with this man. Once our boy finally appears before the Duke, he introduces himself as Dane Sugres and bows his head, saying it's an honor to meet him. The Duke laughs, impressed by the kid's manners, and asks his father if Dane is also learning to use a spear, to which Arkan replies that he is. At that moment, a little lady approaches Duke Bout from behind, and when Dane's eyes land on her, he is startled for a moment. The girl greets Count Sogres promptly, bowing her head to show her proper manners. She introduces herself as Layla Thermion, the youngest daughter of the Thermion Duchy. After this acquaintance, the celebration continued onward. The guests enjoyed the music and the beautiful evening. But this could not be said for Arkan Sogres and Bout Thermion, all because Baroness Thermion was still ill. And despite Bout's best efforts to find a cure or method to cure her, nothing worked. Arkan hoped that this was all just a temporary ordeal and his friend's wife would get better soon. But still, Bout warned him that if he suddenly disappeared, it would mean that his wife felt worse, and he used a teleportation scroll to return to the capital. Anyway, today is a party for Dane, who had just disappeared somewhere. To Bout, he seemed quite the witty child, and he wanted to talk to him a little more. Arkan didn't know where his son was either, and noticed that Miss Layla had disappeared with him. Finding them turned out to be quite easy. The two went for a walk together. They probably didn't like this boring party like dozens of others. But what the two were talking about was a mystery to their parents. In private, Layla was very talkative, and to be honest, she didn't like to follow her father to all these noble parties. But this time she was glad she had come. Layla had heard a lot about how handsome Dane was, but now he looked even better in the moonlight, and she liked this place. Dane was glad to hear that she liked it here. Unlike the capital, the Sogres family's territory was a nice and quiet place. That's why Layla envied him. At her house, there's always something going on. Nobles come every day with business and offers to her father. Sometimes even the imperial family shows up. And the most annoying thing is that every time someone comes, she has to dress in formal dress and go out to greet them. That's exactly what she just hates. Instead of all that, she'd like to wear something practical and simple and practice with her sword all day. Dane was surprised that such a small and seemingly harmless girl was practicing with a sword and not magic. He himself loved his quiet territory. It wasn't as lively as the capital, and it gives him a lot of free time to practice with his spear, which he just loves. Layla was surprised at first that he was using a spear, but then she remembered his father's nickname and everything fell into place. She had heard many times from her father how incredible Blue Whirlwind was. And since Dane is practicing so hard with the spear, it means he wants to join the academy too. However, that wasn't why Dane was practicing with the spear. Layla was surprised by this answer. For her to practice hard to join the academy was an obvious choice. She had heard that just getting in was incredibly difficult. Well, Dane didn't really doubt that he would get in, and he was only practicing because he wanted to be even better after he entered the academy. Layla couldn't believe his confidence. So she asked him what he would do if he failed to get in. Well, even in that case, our hero was not going to get upset and give up. Instead, he would just try again. And if even with the second attempt will not work, he will take it as an answer that this is not his way. Layla just couldn't believe such a casual attitude towards the future. So she asked him if he was afraid of upsetting his family and home. And of course, our hero was not concerned. Compared to the trials of his past life, it was nothing. Layla, on the other hand, had only to envy him. Her home considers failure to be unacceptable. Although Dane had lived surrounded by nobles for 7 years, he was still surprised at how petty nobles were for worrying about such stuff. As for Layla, he had no doubt that she would succeed. When she heard the encouraging words, she just lit up and gladly offered Dane to look at her swordsmanship skills. Our hero was a little surprised by such eagerness, but it was impossible to stop her when the opportunity to practice with a sword appeared on the horizon. Layla immediately asked where the training ground was, and Dane had to accompany her, hoping that nothing would happen there. On the training ground, Layla did not hold back and made move after move like an experienced swordsman. To a beginner's eye, her movements might have seemed perfect, but our hero was far from a beginner. Watching her movements, he had to admit that her transition from attack to defense and back flowed very smoothly, and the timings of her attacks were excellent. But there was one point. After a while, her movements stopped hitting the beat and lost their flow. Out of breath after the exercise, a satisfied Layla asked him what he thought of her movements. At first, Dane was not very honest and said that she acted fantastically and that he enjoyed watching her. Layla was quite pleased with this praise, but Dane decided to be honest with her. He noticed that she still had room to improve. For example, after the third form, Layla was taking a half step more than necessary. And then it happened again with subsequent forms. These repeated extra half steps then made the later sword forms feel slightly out of alignment. Such criticism left Layla speechless. It seemed like she was about to cry, and Dane was beginning to think that such criticism was too blatant for her. He even started to apologize for upsetting her, and even said that maybe he was wrong because he had seen the swordsman wielding the sword a long time ago. But he was worried for nothing. Layla quickly gained control of herself and gripped the sword tighter. Now she realized her mistake. Now she started repeating the training moves again, and this time they were perfect. Dane's advice was exactly the puzzle she was missing for perfection. Her joy and gratitude was unbounded. She even hugged Dane. Our hero tried to resist, but it didn't work so well. Layla was simply fascinated by how much he knew about swordsmanship. In an instant, he noticed what she had been doing wrong all this time, and what her teachers hadn't told her. She promised she would remember his help. Eventually, she let Dane go, nearly suffocating him in her arms. But then she almost chopped him with her sword. That little lady really needs a lesson in neatness. Dane was caught off guard by such a sudden hug, but you couldn't say he didn't like it. Of course, their moment of privacy was soon interrupted by the shouts of servants looking everywhere for them. They had rested enough from the banquet and were not going to hide, so they hurried back, so they wouldn't be found on the training ground. When they returned, Dane was the center of attention as his parents officially congratulated him on his birthday and the discovery of his first mana core, and of course they gave him a present. It was a brooch with the family crest, similar to the ones his older sisters had. His mother advised him to treasure the gift, for this brooch would now serve as a proof of his status and honor. After his parents, all the guests joined in the congratulations. Dane had now officially and truly earned the name Sogres, and no one present doubted that he would grow up to be a fine man like his father. Dane's parents were very happy, and so was little Dane himself, for it was the first time in his 2 lives that he had received such warm congratulations from so many people. Suddenly, the whole room shook. The guests started screaming and panicking, thinking it was either an earthquake or an enemy invasion. Dane also began to worry, but his father quickly reassured him that there was nothing to be frightened of. Arkan Sogres knew very well what was going on. Even though he had hoped that today would be a calm day, apparently his daughter didn't listen to him. Dane really didn't know that. Lightning bolts appeared near the very ceiling of the hall, and in a second, a portal appeared above the frightened guests. There was no end to the guests' bewilderment when a small figure flew out of that portal, who apparently laughed at the laws of physics, and landed on the floor without any trouble at all. It was Dane's older sister Arabella, and in her opinion, she wasn't late at all. The guests still couldn't lift their jaws from the floor, surprised that such a young lady could already use teleportation magic. Normally, to open even a small gate, one had to reach at least 5 chains. Dane did not admire her power at all, but rather was annoyed at how loud and flashy she was. But as soon as the guests calmed down a bit, a huge monster appeared in the sky. A large wyvern with a rider. It seems that this time Lady Claire frightened the guests. She was in a bad mood though. She was only one step too late to get ahead of her sister. As she entered, the guests around her started talking about how they had heard she was a brilliant summoner, but no one expected her to control a wyvern at only age of 16. Finally, they were home again, and together they stood before their parents and brother to wish a happy birthday to their little favorite brother Dane. After both of their flashy entrances, Dane's sisters hurriedly shoved their respective gifts at him as they wished their little brother a happy birthday. He thanked Arabella and Claire for coming all the way back home, even though they were busy with their studies. The girls were just excited to see their little bro open the gifts. Duke Arkan nearly shed a tear at the preferential treatment his son was getting. His daughters only got him a letter for his birthday after all. Dane opened the box Arabella handed him, and inside was a ring transformed into a convenient dimensional pouch. She designed the artifact herself. The subspace magic used in its crafting belonged to the highest chain. Arabella's esteemed professor applied it to the ring. It is common knowledge just how difficult it is to imbue subspace magic into any item. Arabella took the ring and adoringly took her brother's hand to put it on. She must have spent a lot of time designing an artifact capable of withstanding a whole subspace. She also applied Dane's genetic code to the ring, so no one else would be able to use it except her little bro. It's a one-of-a-kind item. Mommy Lily examined the ring and saw a small wave of mana running around the artifact, which meant it was made using the highest grade of magic stones. Arabella explained that all Dane had to do was imbue a bit of mana into the ring, and the subspace would be established. It's much more convenient than normal dimensional pouches. That fact alone made this an invaluable artifact. As far as Dane could remember, these types of tools were something only used by the wealthy on the battlefield. Only noble-born commanders and high-ranking magicians wielded such convenient power. The ring would also grow as he got older, adapting to his body. Dane tried to imbue his mana into the artifact, and a green portal opened in front of everyone. Duke Arkan was stunned to see his son do it so effortlessly. Claire, Duke Bout-Thermion, and Layla were flabbergasted at the radiant display of magic. Dane managed to open a subspace faster than Arabella had done years ago. He was a genius, there's no doubt about it. It would be a groundbreaking feat if he managed to cultivate both a mana core and a mage's circle at the same time. After the display of magic, Claire came up to her little bro and handed him her gift. Dane slowly opened the present while sincerely thanking his big sis. Inside the wooden box was a peculiar-looking egg laid on top of a soft cloth. Confused, he grabbed the egg and asked what it was. Claire panicked and warned him to be careful with it, as it was not an ordinary egg. Everyone in the family was also curious as to what this odd gift was, but Claire only revealed what it was to Dane. She whispered that it was a familiar. She got it by accident while she was trying to summon Decaron. Claire herself doesn't know what will hatch from it, but everyone in the world knows how precious a familiar could be. Dane tried to picture what this odd egg would give him. He had heard about familiars before. Unlike summons, they are an entirely different entity. A familiar summoned once can permanently remain in the real world. Claire asserted that Dane should keep this egg a secret until it hatches in the future. He promised that he would. All the whispering between the two irritated Arabella, who was feeling left out. As for Claire's instructions, Dane must make sure to pour his mana into the egg once in the morning, and once in the evening, to make it recognize him as its master. Lily was just glad that her little boy was receiving such incredible gifts. It showed how much her children cared about each other. With the gift-giving done, Duke Arkan cleared his throat and reminded his daughters to at least say hello to their parents, seeing as they crashed the party after saying they might not be able to make it. Realizing that they hadn't said a word to their parents since arrival, the girls awkwardly greeted their father. Duke Arkan was a big softy when it came to his children, so he didn't really mind. He was just glad to see his girls again. Since they went off to pursue their professions, the girls rarely came home anymore, so Duke Arkan was glad to see them looking healthy. Layla watched the Sogre's family being so lovingly loud and jovial with one another from afar. The little girl could not help but compare her own home situation to theirs. Dane noticed her staring at them and turned his head. He noticed the dip in her mood as she silently walked away. He wondered why she looked so lonely and sad in the middle of a lively crowd of nobles. The banquet wrapped up, and the next day came. Duke Bout-Thermion stayed the night and was now walking through Sogre's territory. He could not help but think about how incredibly talented Arabella Sogre's was. As expected of the best mage at the academy, her talent in the magical arts was unparalleled. The girl could be the perfect match for Duke Thermion's son, the academy's best swordsman. If House Sogris and Thermion could combine through a marriage between those two, it would give birth to a faction that could rival even the imperial family. If that happened, no one would be able to mess with both houses and their children. So, Duke Thermion decided to bring up the matter of engagement between the eldest children in today's conversation with Arkan. On the way to meet the other Duke, Thermion caught the sound of steel nearby. It came from the training grounds, so someone must be honing their technique inside incredibly early in the morning. Of course, it was Dane polishing his spear skills with utmost focus. He had gotten quite deadly with the weapon. With years of training with his dad and his insane work ethic, he had long since become combat ready. Dane's focus was unparalleled. He moved with the fluidity and sharpness of a veteran warrior, flying all over the battlefield while delivering multiple killing blows. He pushed his speed even harder and kicked the intensity to a higher gear. Finally, his arms blurred as he delivered countless spear stabs in a short amount of time. Curiosity got the best of Duke Thermion, and he ended up spying on the boy's training from afar. He was pleasantly surprised by the youngest son of House Sogris going sicko mode in training. With his experienced eyes, he could discern how incredibly polished Dane's technique was. His movements and concentration did not feel like those of a 7-year-old at all. Even his simple stabs were refined to a terrifying degree. Everything was executed to such a high degree that spearmen who have been on the battlefield for years could still learn from it. When Dane finally wrapped up his last sequence, he was huffing and puffing for air. Duke Thermion was thoroughly impressed from start to finish. What he had just witnessed felt impossible. He had heard rumors about the young Sogris showing incredible talent, even way back when he was just a baby. But he always thought those were just exaggerated hearsay. Now he knew those rumors were true. After a little break, Dane went back to practicing. He focused on his movement and footwork this time around. Being one of the strongest swordsmen in the land, Duke Thermion could not help but notice that the kid's stance and footwork seemed similar to a swordmaster's. The Duke started considering that the kid might have even picked up swordsmanship to a high degree at such a young age. Finally, Dane noticed that someone was watching him from the doorway. He brandished his spear, ready to strike, as he warned whoever was sneakily watching him to come out instead of hiding. Duke Thermion got too excited and ended up getting detected by a kid. It was not his proudest moment as a skilled warrior. The more he thought about Dane's movements, the more strangely familiar they felt. He was certain he had seen that same footwork somewhere before. The Duke had to reveal himself and apologize to Dane for eavesdropping on his private training session. He insisted he wasn't trying to do anything shady. Seeing as the eavesdropper was Duke Thermion, Dane felt bad for speaking out of turn. Even though he had been living in his current body for 7 years now, this man was still the one who defeated and killed him in his previous life. Remembering his etiquette training, Dane Sogris formally greeted the Duke. Duke Thermion confessed that he was mesmerized by the sight of the Rising Star's early morning training and apologized once more. The kid held his own, responding that he was forgiven. The Duke was amused by his guts to speak as if they were equals. Now that he had a closer look at Dane, he noticed that the boy's body wasn't even showing signs of fatigue or trembling despite such intense training. When he was his age, he hadn't even made a manicore. The Duke pointed out Dane's excellent stabbing attack, observing that the boy had inherited Arkan's talent with the spear. The spear itself was also crafted really well. Dane formally thanked the Duke for recognizing his technique, and the old man smirked. Not only was this kid a lethal soldier, but he also knew what to say at any given moment. In comparison, his own son did not have such excellent skills and manners when he was 7. This little detour made Duke Thermion consider arranging a marriage between Layla and Dane as well. So he slyly interjected that his daughter had also been training her swordsmanship. He suggested that since they were of similar age, they should look out for each other once they entered the academy in the future. Dane continued responding politely. The Duke liked the young man's forthrightness. Finally, Duke Thermion excused himself so as not to bother Dane's training any more than he already had. But before leaving the training hall, he still had one more curious question he wanted answered. He wanted to know if the kid had ever trained in swordsmanship too. Dane made a mistake in front of the Duke. His old habits must have come out without realizing it. Given Duke Thermion's discerning eyes, it's not surprising that he recognized the minuscule habits in one look. Dane answered that he had just read some textbooks on basic swordsmanship, but had never formally trained in it. The Duke still found it strange that he sensed something akin to raw battlefield sense in the kid. But common sense dictates that an inexperienced child couldn't have that killer instinct. At last, the Duke finally got off his back and bade farewell, and Dane sent him off. Duke Thermion also extended an invitation for him to visit if he happened to come to the capital in the future. The swordsman had become personally interested in Dane's talents. Dane wondered if the man still remembered him. Just thinking about defeating someone who ended his life before was already getting his blood pumping. If he laid a solid foundation and prepared step by step, He was certain he could surpass the Duke. It's one of his goals to defeat the mighty Bout Thermian in this life. Continuing with his training, Dane lost track of time, and Hernan, the attendant, had to fetch him. He was always watching the kid from the shadows, always ready to attend to his needs. With Hernan's faint presence, Dane reckoned that this guy could be talented enough to learn assassination and stealth skills. Today, everyone had been very busy preparing for the second banquet. Some of the nobles had already begun to arrive. In their location, gathering more than 30 noble families to arrive on the exact date was difficult. As for Dane's sisters, they had already opened a teleporter gate and went back to the academy together. It couldn't be helped as they had midterm exams soon. For now, it was about time for Dane to clean up and dress up too. He made a mental note to take a closer look at the gifts his sisters gave him last night. After his intense training, Dane was tended to and dressed up. He entered the family hall with his mom and dad and mingled with various nobles. Dane had to put his etiquette training into practice the whole night as he schmoozed with high society. He was paraded around as the birthday boy. Everyone's attention was fixed on him. Finally, he managed to get out of the banquet hall and breathe. The life of a noble was a tiring one. His schedule was more packed than usual as the birthday boy, but at least he could always find solace resting in their beautiful garden. Mr. Gardner had worked hard to cultivate this special place beautifully, the kind of beauty that gives peace. Dane looked at the flowers in full bloom, exploding with their unique colors as butterflies danced around. He remembered his oldest sister lecturing him about how flowers contain the most mana in nature. Since he had a little bit of time to kill, he might as well try and analyze the mana in these flowers. Dane closed his eyes and concentrated on the natural flow of magic in the air. Without opening his eyes, he began grasping the concept his sister explained to him. He started sensing the mana in the flowers. He had been training in multiple fields all at once but had not seen any noticeable development in mage magic and summoning magic. He was having a hard time picking and choosing what fields to devote his time to. Having too many talents could be troublesome at times like this. Bro was literally suffering from success. After spending a few minutes immersed in the natural mana in the garden, he finally saw the mana in the flowers. He could not believe that such a small thing could contain such a massive, rushing mana flow. If one can feel the flow of nature and somehow make it their own, the principle could settle into the body to form a magic circle. That's precisely what is happening now. It helped a lot that his body's mana affinity had always been tremendous. He could clearly see something others could only faintly feel with their sixth sense. Just one trip to the garden had improved his perception of mana by a ton. What he could only faintly see before had become clearer. He was so close to grasping the inner workings of magic when he felt something shatter. Meanwhile, two noble kids had also found their way into the garden, bored by the chit-chat of the grown-ups in the banquet hall. They were siblings. The older redhead was just bitter that no one was paying attention to him as everyone was talking about the genius Sogra's kid. He aggressively walked on top of the bed of flowers, destroying them in the process. The red-headed siblings had lost their way into the massive garden and happened to see Dane standing around in a daze. They eyed his clothes and mistakenly assessed that Dane must be a servant and yelled at him. He did not take too kindly to this disrespectful brat. The bastard dared to order him to lead him and his brother to the exit. Dane saw what they were doing to the flowers and yelled at them to stop stomping on the plants. Red Bastard had the nerve to feel offended for being yelled at. Dane asked why they were ruining the flower bed instead of using the garden paths. Red Bastard saw that he was small and continued acting obnoxiously. Then came the flaunting of their family name as all noble brats do. Dane didn't care though. To him they just looked like a pair of brutes ruining his garden's flower bed. Red Bastard did not like being called a brute, but he acted like one and grabbed Dane by the collar. He and his brother were the sons of Count Tyron, a guest of the castle. Hearing the name of Count Tyron reminded Dane of a memory from his previous life. That guy was the noble he captured after a shameful defeat on the battlefield. He remembered Count Tyron as an irritating noble, one of those horrible bastards. Based on the behavior of the brute in front of him right now, the phrase, like father, like son, seemed perfect. Red Bastard continued flexing his family name, boasting that they were famous in the capital. He even bragged that his house could make Dane disappear without a trace, so he had better watch his mouth. Dane knew plenty of dumbasses like this kid from before. He knew that words wouldn't get through Red Bastard's thick skull filled with air. The boy raised his fist, swinging at Dane while still thinking he was just roughing up a mere servant. Dane wasn't going to let that happen though. He responded by bashing his head against Red Bastard's nose as hard as he could. It was a critical hit that nearly crushed the Red Bastard's snorter. The little brother worriedly called his big bro. He checked on Red Bastard, who slumped on the ground after being hit hard. Wiping his nose, he saw blood and started freaking out as though he had never bled before. When he saw the red in his hand, Red Bastard's blood boiled, and he threatened to kill Dane. Finding the threat amusing, our boy stood on business and dared the brat to go ahead and try. Red Bastard wanted to pay back blood with blood. His little brother had some sense in him and wanted to stop his big bro, but Red Bastard was way too arrogant to be stopped. The brute launched a punch forward, and Dane nonchalantly dodged by, jumping back. It was a mismatch through and through. Dane was way too slippery for an amateur. While he let the Red Bastard tire out, he observed that the brat's footwork was too sloppy, as if he had never held a weapon in his life. Dane considered that the bastard might be a mage or a summoner. The barrage of punches continued, none of them even coming close to hitting a single strand of Dane's hair. Red Bastard's nose continued to bleed as his patience ran thin. Dane continued playing with his enemy using his superior footwork, and an idea came to his mind. Maybe he could harness the flow of magic he saw on the flower earlier and incorporate his will into it. If he succeeded, he should be able to compress that force into a physical form. He might as well use this opportunity to test it out in combat. The bastard's little brother watched on the sidelines with his mouth wide open. Dane planted his feet on the ground and started accumulating magic in his hands. He visualized a ball of raw mana and sent it hurtling toward the brat's stomach. The force was powerful enough to send Red Bastard painfully crashing onto the grass, making a mess of the concrete on the way. He screamed in agony, his body and ego bruised. Lil Bro checked on his loser Big Bro lying on the bed of flowers. Dane was more concerned about the flower bed he had just ruined than the bastard's well-being. But the Red Bastard was tenacious. He still had enough gas in the tank to stand back up. Seeing as Dane could use magic, Red Bastard demanded to know who Dane was. Lil Bro continued trying to discourage his Big Bro to no avail. His pride was too wounded to care about any fallout or trouble. Red Bastard beckoned the mana inside his body and started opening some sort of insidious portal. Dane was surprised to see the familiar sight. This type of magic belonged to summoners. The mana swirled and coalesced together until a translucent wolf started descending to the ground. The wolf looked bloodthirsty and predatory, with its snarling sharp fangs. Red Bastard laughed maniacally as he called his summon named Genpu. He finally introduced himself as Digron Tyron, ready to show Dane the consequences of messing with someone of his stature. Dane heard the brat ordered the wolf to tear him apart, but he was unimpressed by the mere wolf summon. It certainly felt lacking, as he had gotten used to seeing his sister Claire summoning fearsome beasts like her wyvern. Digron stood far away as Genpu lunged at the unmoving Dane. He just looked at the wolf in the eye and did not budge. Genpu must have sensed that he would suffer a horrible fate if he dared to go through with the attack. So, the wolf turned its tail and did a 180 spin. Its aura visibly changed as though the aggression against Dane had totally dissipated. The Tyron brothers were dumbfounded. Digron's pride, his summon, had seemingly turned against him. Right now, the big puppy was behaving as though he was subservient to Dane. Digron yelled at his summon to rip Dane's throat and end his life, but the orders fell on deaf ears. In response, the puppy started happily wagging its tail toward Dane. Sensing no ill will from the summoned beast, Dane gave the good boy some gentle pets. Even he had no clue how this turn of events happened. Now that he thought about it, even Claire's summons had always been friendly to him. Even the wyvern played with him sometimes. At that time, he simply thought that it was due to his blood ties with his sister. But in a situation like this, where there was no familiar relation, the summoned beast still behaved in a friendly manner. This could mean that he had an abnormally high favorability to all kinds of summoned beasts, or Genpu's favorability toward his bastard summoner had hit rock bottom. Digron could not understand what was happening. He had never heard of a summon betraying their master. Dane was just winning on every front, and he continued taunting Digron to come at him. Lil Bro was practically begging his big bro to stop embarrassing himself and accept the L to no avail. Digron's pathetic ass still wanted to fight, but Lil Bro really needed this fight to be over. The poor kid, caught up by his brother's foolishness, had peed his shorts in fear. Lil Bro cried, and Digron cursed him out for being an embarrassment. Dane added salt to the wound in their pride by pointing out the bathhouse in the basement of the main castle. Digron used his little brother's accident to get out of Dodge. As if he hadn't made enough of a fool of himself already, he ordered Dane to stay in the garden. Dane just stared at the pathetic loser with disgust. Digron did not even take his summon with him. Our boy continued hanging out in the garden, experimenting with his new understanding of mana. He tried to practice a trick that Claire taught him before. He identified what was left of the faint link between that bastard Digron and Genpu. He cut that thing off and carefully overwrote the link with his own magic. In doing so, the wolf and he became officially connected. A kid who hadn't done anything close to a proper summoning managed to pull off the intricate trick by just leveraging his high favorability with summoned beasts. Now, he had officially succeeded as a summoner. While he was basking in the glory of his success, Dane heard a familiarly annoying voice seemingly looking for him. Digron Tyron, the bratty bastard, actually called his daddy and snitched that he was bullied by some kid in the garden and pointed Dane out. The coward plugged his nose holes to stop the bleeding while bitching to his dad about being knocked around by Dane and canceling the link with his summon. Big boy Mogard Tyron stepped forward and introduced himself as the head of the Tyron Count family, one of the capital's great nobles, with gusto. He asked if Dane really messed up his son's face and forcefully stole his summon. Our boy was not one to back out in front of a pig, so he stood on business and owned what he did. He noticed that Mogard Tyron looked a lot fatter now than when he captured the pig as a prisoner. Peace times must be treating him really well, even though he was a disgrace on the battlefield. Mogard continued posturing as he asserted that he could not let this matter come to pass. Messing with his kids was something he could not overlook. The pig continued with his barrage of demanding questions and finally asked the kid to reveal his identity. Our boy held his head high and formally introduced himself as Dane Sogres, the youngest son of Arkan Sogres, the Lord of the South, and the head of the Sogres Count family. Boy gave them that Game of Thrones intro. This introduction stunned the trashy father and son duo. They had unknowingly offended the fucking birthday boy. They didn't know that they were messing with the famed rising star of the South. The Duke is quite bewildered by this unexpected encounter with the youngest son of House of Sogres. Speaking of great noble houses, he recalls how he was taken prisoner by that guy Argrick and had no significant contribution in the war, leaving every great noble laughing at him. Right now, he sees this as a perfect opportunity to maneuver the situation in his favor, intending to ruin the Count Sogres' name and use that as a pretext to demand mining rights. The nobles who once looked down on him will soon be bowing before him. With that in mind, the big brain fatty turns to our boy, asking if he's the birthday boy Dane. My guy just shakes his head in response and confirms it positively. The fatty is barely holding on to his frustration, because he definitely did not come here to celebrate the birthday of some brat. He then points at his shitty son, Digron, and asks Dane how he plans to repay the humiliation he caused his son. Not only did Dane injure his son, who is a guest invited by Sogres, but he also stole their summon, which is a grave crime. The shitty son also agrees with his equally shitty father, telling Dane that this is his last day. The fatty then also threatens our boy, stating that he's going to speak with Count Sogres personally and hold him accountable for his actions. Dane just acknowledges what the fatty is saying and further states that before heading toward his father, he wants his son to apologize first. Of course, the chubster starts fuming out of his mind, asking what the hell he's talking about, while his son grits his teeth in anger as well. But Dane makes it clear that while it's true he hit his son and hurt him, it was all in self-defense against a threat to his life. Plus, he emphasizes that he didn't steal their summon. Genpu chose to follow him. The trash son quickly pipes up, claiming that there's no way Genpu would do that, and tells his father that Dane is lying. That's when the father takes a moment to reflect. He recalls hearing that the second daughter of House Sogres is a genius summoner, so he's sure there's a good chance that girl taught Dane how to forcibly cut off a link between familiar and master. The chubster keeps going back and forth with our boy, while Dane can't help but feel like this is such a drag. Eventually, Mogard decides to simmer down, because after yapping for so long, his jaw is literally hurting. He tells Dane that he won't scold him any longer, and decides they should go see what Count Sogres has to say about the situation. With the speak of the devil, the Count himself arrives on the scene, accompanied by Duke Thermion. Of course, both the trash son and his father are absolutely boggled to see Count Sogres. And what's even more mind-boggling for them is that Duke Thermion is here too. As night descends, we see the red-headed boy giving his testimony to the Count about how he just got lost in the garden with his little brother, which is why he asked Dane to guide them. He continues yapping and making up stories, while Dane stands behind him nonchalantly, thinking how his father is actually listening to this guy yap. I guess that's not surprising to him, given how Count Sogres cares deeply about his family and its reputation. He's not the type to be biased toward any one side. Even in conflicts with outsiders, he can tell right from wrong. After finishing his story, the red-headed boy wraps up by stating that all of a sudden, Dane headbutted him and kept using this weird technique to mock him. He claims that to scare Dane off, he called out to his summon, but Dane just stole his summon from him and tried to attack back. Once Digron is done speaking, Mogard steps up, telling the Count that he only intended to give Dane a warning. However, he insists that stealing someone's summon is clearly wrong, and he simply can't let that part slide. Finally, Count Sogres also speaks up, letting Mogard know that he won't roll on his judgment just after hearing one side of this quarrel. He wants to hear what Dane has to say, then assess the whole situation before drawing a judgment. He also reassures Mogard that if he's worried about any biased judgments, Duke Thermion will also give his opinion on the matter. The Duke quickly smirks and states that if this is that important, he can handle it. Mogard feels frustrated as his face sweats profusely. He knows he's about to get screwed. Getting Thermion involved is only going to complicate things further, and he's not feeling good about it. Count Sogres gives the green light to his son to explain himself, and Dane braces himself, claiming that what Mogard's son said wasn't entirely accurate, but some of it is actually true. He then explains that the flowers they grew with such care in their garden were stepped on as he pleased. So he only told Mogard's son to get out of there, which made Mograd's son angry and started the fight. Of course, both Fatty and his son are absolutely awestruck after hearing these brutal truth bombs, with the son even trying to deny it by calling Dane a liar. But the Count tells Dane to continue, so our boy further explains that when Mogard's son summoned Genpu, his command was to kill him. He also clarifies that he didn't steal his summon. Rather, Genpu came to him first and saw his goodwill. The Duke is utterly bewildered to see how fluently this 7-year-old is speaking, with such grace and a proper choice of words. Dane, on the other hand, confirms once again that he never stole anyone's summon. Mogard loses his cool, stomping his feet on the ground and calling it nonsense. He claims it's impossible for a summon to submit to someone who isn't even a summoner, insisting that Dane must have used some shady technique to pull it off. But not surprisingly, Dane informs Mogard that he possesses an innate affinity with summons, and a summon that isn't close enough to its master could submit to someone like him as well. Mogard refuses to believe it, while our boy simply states that this is actually true. Mogard's face looks like he's going through serious constipation, and he just says that this kid is just making things up. The Duke then chimes in, suggesting they should just be able to prove it with a summon. Count Sogres turns to his son, asking if he can prove it, to which Dane agrees. Meanwhile, Mogard shoots a death glare at his son for putting him in this hot mess, while the bratty son feels sure he's about to get screwed by his father, as he has no idea what he'll do if he fails to summon Genpu. Once the bratty son tries to summon Genpu, he utterly fails, prompting his father to yell at him, just as expected. On the other hand, Dane just smirks, thinking about how he has already severed the connection, so of course there's no way the boy could summon Genpu back. Dane then decides to demonstrate himself by summoning Genpu, but adds that in order to do that, he needs a sign that Mogard's son possesses. The bratty son gets angry, questioning the audacity of Dane demanding his sign. He yaps a lot of nonsense, but Count Sogres cuts him off, reminding him that according to their own words, even if Dane uses the sign, he shouldn't be able to summon Genpu. So, there's no harm in trying. Mogard sweats as he has no option other than to give the sign, so he reluctantly tells his bratty son, Digron, to hand it over. The redhead nearly teeters on the brink of tears, but his father just tells him to hurry up. Once Dane has the sign in his hand, he starts his mojo, and he also reveals to us that since a summon sign has a summoner's unique code name engraved on it, no one else is usually able to use it. However, Genpu, which Digron summoned, was imbued with his mana, so the summon sign is just a vehicle, and Genpu has already connected with him. As soon as he calls out to Genpu, the monster appears and starts licking his cheeks. The Count and the Duke are both in awe, while Mogard and Digron tremble after getting exposed for lying. The Duke finds it amazing and wonders if Dane was not also learning spearmanship. His father confirms this, but admits he isn't entirely sure about his son's abilities either. The Chubster, on the other hand, realizes he's screwed, as his entire plan has backfired. The Count then turns to him, asking if he acknowledges that Dane is telling the truth. The fatty quickly tries to play it cool, laughing it off while admitting that they perhaps mistook Dane for stealing their summon. He also concedes that his son wasn't truly trying to kill Dane, and he asks his bratty son if that's right. Digron trembles but nods along with his father, saying he was just trying to scare Dane off. But our boy is furious to see these bastards trying to weasel out of accountability so easily. Before the two seniors can roll their final verdict on the matter, a lady strolls into the scene, startling everyone present, especially Dane,